In the year 2007, BioWare released a game for the Xbox 360 called Mass Effect. It was essentially an instant classic, and for a good reason. Developed by the people who made games such as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, and Baldur's Gate, Mass Effect was a sci-fi video game influenced by classic sci-fi films and fiction. It had a lot of lore in it, especially for a first installment, and it nailed that sci-fi movie feeling with exploration, an interesting story that let you play at your own pace, well written characters, and good gameplay even if it got repetitive at times. It was designed for multiple playthroughs. You could level up your characters with an interesting skill point system, kind of like, say, older pen and paper role playing games or Shin Megami Tensei, and you could equip your main character to be something other than the default run and gun configuration. Sure, it was not perfect, and technically, Mass Effect was rough around the edges, from poor optimization to the elevator load sequences that could be long when playing the game from the disc, but it still holds up amazingly well on its own for an early 360 game. Of course, quite a few things happened after this game came out to taint it, and it's easy to see why. There were two sequels made, with the gimmick being that your save file would carry over to the next game, similar to what multi-part role-playing games in the PS2 era did, such as Da Hack or Digital Devil Saga. However, this game would also carry over your choices from the last title as well, and not just your save file with your character and everything. Despite this hype, however, the Mass Effect series was developed over several years, and due to this, things happened at the studio. Old writers were replaced by new ones, staff changed, and most importantly, BioWare was no longer an independent studio being purchased by EA. By the time the third title in the series was released, it's pretty clear that the sequels could not hold up to the original, from the ending, which was the same thing regardless of your choices and only differed in colors, to the fact that the game didn't expand on or complete plot threads that the previous two games introduced, but relied on the sequels to finish up. One key example of this is the Arachne decision from the first Mass Effect. During one of the few key story missions in the game, you would find out that there was an alien race that was thought to be extinct, but was really alive in the lab you were investigating. And you were given an option to either kill the sole remaining queen of this race or let her go. While you'd think that this would mean a lot in the later Mass Effect titles, what happens next is, well, relatively minor, and it doesn't allow you to fully experience the ethics of your critical choice throughout the series. And honestly, that sums up the writing for the Mass Effect series in a nutshell, with lots of blown opportunities and letdowns in both 2 and 3. Fast forward to 2017, and BioWare is releasing a new game in the now tainted franchise, Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, the game is the first title in a new Mass Effect trilogy without Shepard or any of the previous characters, and instead entirely new ones and several of the species from the older games. The premise is that during the events of the older games, tons of humans and other species left on a giant ship to go to a new galaxy, except of course not everything went as planned, and by the time you land there, you find out that the planet has not only been colonized by another alien race, but that the planets are nothing like what they were 600 years ago when you first left on your journey to these planets. Anyhow, this game has become one of the most controversial and tainted games in gaming, and for a good reason. Thanks to a preview from EA Access, the conduct of BioWare staff in the past, both on their forums, on social media, and when talking to the press, the history of the Mass Effect franchise, and pre release gameplay footage, the game has been mocked for being absolutely laughable. However, being that BioWare is on the right side of history and one of the most diverse game development studios, they've been defended from the critics by the press, who is defending this game just like they did with Ghostbusters 2016. And not because of the game itself or its merits, but because of these darn trolls posting mean comments on the computer, on the cybernet. And it's just like that, but with the gaming community, and therefore a smaller scale. I mean, sure, nothing is going to top when Time Magazine did a cover story on the star of Ghostbusters 2016 being sent Harambe memes and throwing a tantrum. Well, maybe if we exclude the whole 30 round assault GIF incident on Twitter, But they're already talking about the horrible cyber violence that an animator who worked on Mass Effect Andromeda is receiving because of the horrible animations. And at least one person posted that you should purchase this game to help these cyberbullied damsels in distress online. Did I mention that, as usual, there are clickbait articles about how gamers are dead and how they are these horrible, toxic people who didn't hand over EA $60 for the new Mass Effect and sent mean comments to a person who made horrible animations? But does this mean that Mass Effect Andromeda is any good? Or that Mass Effect Andromeda is essentially being sold with the same kind of white knight marketing that tried and failed to sell 2016's Ghostbusters remake, where if you didn't go out and watch that movie in theaters and then buy the Blu-ray release, you were an evil white alt-righter, and if you watched this movie, you were fighting the patriarchy and the alt-right. Like, remember that? And let's find out if Mass Effect Andromeda is the same thing. Now, first, let's start by talking about Mass Effect Andromeda's technical side, since that's what's been getting the most attention. Mass Effect Andromeda runs on the Frostbite engine, the same engine that most recent EA titles have used. Now, the Frostbite engine is fairly capable, and while Frostbite 3 was originally used with Battlefield 4, it has since been used in everything from sports games to racing games to role-playing games, as well as Battlefield. When used properly, it's capable of stunning graphics at good frame rates, and it makes it easy to see why EA buying out DICE was to them one of the best choices they could have made. On the other hand, you have this game. Just like how the Unreal Engine was used in both games like Ride to Hell Retribution and iconic last-gen games such as Mass Effect, Dishonored, Mirror's Edge, and Borderlands, and Bioshock, and just like how the CryEngine was used in both Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric and Crysis, this game makes pretty poor use of the same engine that powered games like Battlefield 4. Mass Effect Andromeda is loaded with poorly made models, horrible animations, lighting problems, glitches, and more. And this game has become the joke of the internet, kind of like what happened with Assassin's Creed Unity or Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. While many gamers had low expectations after the ending of Mass Effect 3, let's just say nobody had expectations these low. Despite using the Frostbite engine, these graphics look worse than the Unreal Engine 3 based Mass Effect games, which were at least on par with other games in the same generation despite their optimization issues. Character models look ugly and the animations are poor, from facial expressions to, well, the fact that they are extremely jittery, kind of like an old 360 or original Xbox game. The facial animation problem is especially bad as the game will talk about serious topics as the characters stare with an emotionless and comical expression. While some of the problems can be fixed with simple patches, at the same time, things such as poor animations require more than such a simple patch. And in fact, on the PS4 and PC, the game had multiple patches on day one, not just one patch. Textures in Mass Effect Andromeda are not very high resolution at all, and there is some pop-in noticeable as well, along with a distinct pop-in-like effect when scenes transition during cutscenes, kind of like Horizon Zero Dawn. The line doesn't look like any other Frostbite title, looking like a low-budget Unreal Engine 3 game, and if I can recall correctly, the first Mass Effect looked better than this. Overall, the graphics quality is about on the level of, say, an early 360 game, complete with poor frame rates, except this isn't a 360 game, this is an Xbox One game running on the same engine as Battlefield 4. Battlefield 4 also has a much better frame rate than this game does, along with Star Wars Battlefront, Battlefield Hardline, and Battlefield 1. Lately I've seen Xbox One and PS4 games with mediocre gameplay, but at least good graphics. And this game doesn't even have good graphics. The rush feel of this game is further boosted by the horrendous voice acting that's about as emotional as the 2003 classic from Tommy Wiseau, The Room. Characters talk about people dying and killing each other off with as much emotion as someone ordering a burger from McDonald's, completely with those horrendous facial animations that I previously mentioned. And this game's performance is Oscar winning in the same way that The Room is.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? Huh? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show 'em!
We could use any supplies you have. Food, water, we're short on everything.
This is Foster Addison.
She oversees colonial affairs. Where's the Pathfinder?
You're looking at her.
You're not Alec Ryder.
My father's dead. He made me his successor.
Alec is dead. Please understand, the entire initiative is at risk. None of the Golden Worlds panned out. They're a bust, and there's been no word from the other arcs.
What happened to them?
Unknown. Our supplies are nearly depleted. Rationing bought us some time, but even that's running out.
The writing is also pretty poor, and not just in the cringeworthy dialogue department either. Everything from the premise of the game to the ending is a step down from even the lowest expectations, and it's easy to see why. Many of the original developers no longer work at BioWare, and it's essentially BioWare in name only. In fact, many developers working on the game came to BioWare specifically to work on Mass Effect, which means that this game might as well be some fan fiction from a Danger Hair's Mass Effect fan page on Tumblr. And in fact, one of the writers at BioWare is infamous for being in a news report where she claims she was sexually assaulted in Grand Theft Auto, which is pretty ironic when you consider that Mass Effect was the target of Fox News reports about how Mass Effect was exposing kids to lesbian interspecies sex, and now BioWare is hiring those same kind of critics that criticized the original Mass Effect. How ironic. If you told people in 2007 that BioWare was going to be hiring the same kind of people who criticized Mass Effect in that Fox News report to be writers for their video games, people would laugh at you and wonder where you came up with that kind of stuff. And now, this is not a joke, this is reality, only at BioWare. The ride of Mass Effect Andromeda is littered with sci-fi cliches. In the first prologue alone, there's the "your ship crashes with few survivors" cliche as something goes horribly wrong. There's the character sacrifice to save the main character cliche. There's the unknown alien race that simply wants you dead cliche. And of course, nothing goes as planned. Did I mention that there seem to be fewer decisions this time around? The premise of the game is literally this. Your ship with tons of people on it, called an Ark, gets damaged, and your team scouts a planet to see what's going on and if it's safe to land. Your smaller ship crashes, and you find out said planet is a hellhole, with aliens that just want you dead, and several squad members are killed off. Your father, however, is a tech genius, and manages to disable the device, causing lightning to appear on this planet and try to kill you. But he doesn't have enough skill points to move away from a possible explosion zone, and so he's blown off a cliff. Oops! And then your character's breathing helmet's broken. Oops! And so he sacrifices his life to save yours, and you are now the leader of this group all of a sudden, despite having no experience. Amazing, isn't it? Bravo, BioWare. Bravo. Compare that to the original Mass Effect, where the game actually hooks you in and immerses you from the second you press start, and it's kind of believable too. From the character creation screen that makes you feel like you're viewing information in a database about Commander Shepard, to the first mission, where the game not only immerses you in the world itself, but also the mood of what just happened as you go to the first planet and both discover that the species that the galaxy feared has returned, and the sequence where you're forced to watch visions of an extinct species being destroyed and exterminated. Before you can get your position as a Spectre and your ship, you also need to deliver to the Council proof that a member is trying to bring back the Reapers and get some squad members together to build up your team. It's so much better than the new Mass Effect title is, as it actually keeps you interested in what is happening and makes you feel like you earned your position as a Spectre, instead of just having it handed to you because of luck. However, Andromeda does have a token transgender character, who tells you that they're trans. However, this backfired on BioWare, and hard. On one side of the political spectrum, you have people who don't want diversity and identity politics injected into their sci-fi games, and who want BioWare to go back to the good old days of making games with interesting stories and good gameplay, instead of how many groups can we try to pander to today and get brownie points for. On the other side of the political spectrum, you have people who aren't satisfied with how characters are depicted in games, and having a character of a specific group be represented in a game isn't enough. They have to write it. They have to do it their way. Because if they don't do it their way, well, it's not good enough. And due to this, this token character was panned by both sides, by both the gamers and the special snowflakes who want everything their way. Oh, and of course, there's the usual romance scenes that made the later Mass Effect games famous, but now rendered with the same poor graphics, lighting glitches, and jittery animations the rest of the game is. The Paragon and Renegade reputation system that was famous in older BioWare Mass Effect titles, along with variations in some games before that, such as Knights of the Old Republic, is now gone. While that system had flaws, it did at least let you know the kinds of decisions you were making, and especially in a dialogue wheel-based game like Mass Effect, where you didn't see the exact dialogue you were speaking, it made you feel like your choices mattered. Now you end up with vague decisions, kind of like many newer Western role-playing games, as you pick an option on screen as your character says, something, and your decisions are categorized by tone instead of by the choices your character is making, or the actual words they are saying. It feels like Fallout 4, where you have several tones of talking as well mapped to the different controller face buttons, with different buttons causing your character to say the same thing but in a different tone. And this was such a bomb with players that not only was there a mod to replace this with the traditional dialogue system, but this mod even became one of the most popular Fallout 4 mods. If it didn't work for Fallout 4, it sure doesn't work for this game either, as it makes you feel like your choices do not matter whatsoever in the new Mass Effect compared to the old Mass Effects where you had the Paragon and the Renegade choices to allow you to easily know whose side are you on in this game. Let's go straight to the gameplay now, since that's a crucial feature of Mass Effect. Now, Mass Effect 1, when you start a new game, you'll be able to customize quite a few aspects of your character besides just the appearance. From your character's history up to this point, to your ability your character has. And this wasn't just a perk, it affected everything from the skills you could learn to what guns and armor you could use. While by default you were given a play setting that allowed you to use all 4 weapons and relied on your squad mates for abilities, you could choose to play as a character with different abilities. Now, however, your main character gets both biotics and tech from the get-go and can use all 4 weapon classes. After all, BioWare decided to go for the Gears audience, and so gameplay in Mass Effect Andromeda isn't an RPG with shooter elements, but instead it's a shooter with RPG elements, so it feels less like the older games and more like a modern-day loot shooter. This also means that there's less character customization this time around, and now when you make your character, there's little you can change. The shooting as well, just like any other third-person shooter, and gameplay is like you'd expect. You go around, watch a cutscene, shoot some enemies, collect loot, rinse, wash, and repeat. There's a jetpack and some platforming gameplay similar to that of Titanfall 2 single player, and because lately the trend in first-person shooters has been to add jetpacks to everything. There's also a multiplayer co-op mode with the same exact gameplay as the single player where you complete missions and get unlocks from playing multiplayer. Chances are if you're buying this game and you're a fraghead who buys the newest games, you're just going to move on to the next big thing when you see ads for the local GameStop, because this game offers nothing you haven't seen before gameplay-wise. And speaking of loot shooters, I heard Destiny 2's coming out, and even though it's probably going to be the same bland stuff as 1, I know everybody's going to move on to that soon enough, so people are going to move on from this game quickly. That's the point. So all in all, is this game any good? Well, if you're someone who desperately wants video game waifus but is worried about having something that is too good looking and objectifying, then this is a game for you. After all, Polygon loves it. If you're one of the remaining BioWare fans and are obsessed with a dying game franchise, you probably already bought this game. The same goes if you're a mid-20s quirky new male with a fedora and a beard already growing, and maybe some plaid shirts too. If you are worried about cyberbullied employees of game companies, who chances are own more MacBooks and Benzes than you do, by all means pay $60 for this game. Otherwise, avoid this game. And well, right now, this game is a giant symptom of a massive problem in gaming. Western AAA gaming studios are milking franchises, even tainted ones, for money with that regard to quality or even if it's a good idea. Now sure, there's indie games, but those are pretty tainted as well, and the developers like to widen political divides. And all it takes is one Dina for a game to end up like Mighty Number 9 or Yooka-Laylee. And it seems like Eastern European and Asian developers are where the hype is at among gamers right now, not Western ones. And that's all that needs to be said. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more gaming.